The rain came down like judgment that afternoon, turning the main street of Sage Hollow into a river of mud and shame. On a raised block before the sheriff's office, a young woman stood barefoot, her wrists bound in rope. 19, maybe less. Her name, Clara Wren, was whispered among the crowd like a curse or a prayer, depending who said it. Her dress had once been white. Now it clung to her skin, soaked and torn at the hem. The auctioneer, a man with tobacco-stained teeth, slapped the wooden post beside her and shouted above the thunder, "Debt of $200, gentlemen." "This one comes with a clean name and a decent spine. Who'll make an offer?" Laughter cut through the storm. Men leaned on the railings, spurs jingling, eyes sharp with hunger. One called out, "I'll start at 50. Reckon she'll fetch a good price once she learns to keep quiet." The crowd roared. Clara bit her lip until she tasted blood. Somewhere beyond the faces, the sheriff looked away, pretending rain blurred his view. Then came Rourke, the rancher everyone feared. His hat brim dripped water, his voice carried above the storm. 100, he said. "I'll break her spirit proper." Her heart stuttered. The crowd approved. Rourke owned half the valley and all the cruelty in it. Clara's hands trembled around the rope. She whispered a name only she could hear. Her father's, buried last winter beneath frost. Before the gavel fell, a deep voice rose from the edge of the square. $3 silver. The words were calm, steady, and absurd. Heads turned. A massive man stood at the hitching rail, taller than any there, a coat dark with rain. A beard covered most of his face, but his eyes, gray as riverstone, met the auctioneer's without flinching. $3? Someone laughed. "That's less than a mule." Even Rourke grinned. "You mocking the process, stranger?" The man didn't answer. He stepped closer, coin glinting in his palm. His silence made the others falter. The sheriff's gavel hesitated, then slammed down with a crack. "Sold." The laughter died. Clara's breath caught. The man, Eli Creed, someone whispered, walked forward and cut her ropes with a hunting knife. The blade gleamed once in the gray light. She expected his hand on her arm, a claim. Instead, he simply said, "Come." He turned his back to the crowd, letting her follow or stay. The auctioneer spat into the mud. "She won't last a week up there," he said to no one in particular. They passed the edge of town, horses waiting under the dripping eaves. Clara hesitated, glancing once behind her. The jeers followed until the sound of thunder swallowed them whole. Eli helped her mount without touching her. His voice was low, almost lost in the rain. "Hold tight." They rode north into the timber. The storm deepened, wind slicing through the pines like a saw. The trail climbed until the town lights vanished behind gray sheets of water. For hours, neither spoke. The silence between them grew heavy, but not cruel. Only when the horse stumbled over a fallen branch did she feel the weight of exhaustion press down. Her fingers slipped from the saddle. The wooden locket around her neck, her mother's, broke loose and fell into the mud. She gasped softly, reaching for it, but Eli had already swung down. One hand found it before the current could take it. He turned it over once in his palm, then tucked it into his coat. "Keep it safe," she said, her voice trembling. He nodded. "I will." They climbed higher still, where lightning flickered over black peaks. The air smelled of pine and smoke. Beneath his wide hat, Eli's eyes watched the horizon as though he were leading her not away, but towards something sacred and dangerous. When at last the trail narrowed to a ledge, he stopped. Below them, the valley glowed faintly with distant lamps. Clara turned in the saddle, staring down at the town she'd been sold from. Somewhere in that storm, men still laughed about the girl bought for $3 silver. She wondered if they'd ever imagine her alive by morning. The wind carried his voice softly through the rain. "You'll be safe up here." She looked at him, uncertain. His coat hung heavy, his hands scarred and calloused. Yet there was no claim in his eyes, only mercy. He urged the horse onward, vanishing into mist. Behind them, the thunder rolled like the echo of a gavel, closing one life and opening another. And for the first time since her father's death, Clara felt a strange, fragile thing stir beneath the fear, hope. The storm hadn't eased by the time the trail narrowed into the high pines. Rain fell colder there, fine as needles, seeping through Clara's thin dress until her teeth chattered. Each breath came out in a puff of fog. Eli Creed rode ahead, a shadow against the dim light, silent but steady. The only sound was the horse's hooves in the mud and the faint creak of leather. When she shivered so hard she almost slipped, he halted, pulled off his coat, and handed it back without looking. "Put it on," he said. The coat smelled of smoke and pine resin. It dwarfed her, swallowing her in warmth and rough comfort. She murmured a thank you, but the wind carried her voice away before it reached him. As the hours passed, the world changed. The last traces of town faded. No fences, no lights, no sound but the rain. The pines thickened until the sky vanished, the path winding like a scar through the wilderness. Every step up that mountain felt like leaving one life behind and stepping, half afraid, into another. When the cabin finally appeared through the mist, it seemed to grow out of the mountain itself, logs blackened by rain, a stone chimney breathing thin smoke. No decorations, no welcome. It stood like a fortress built by someone who'd stopped expecting company. Eli dismounted and tethered the horses beneath a lean-to. He pushed open the cabin door and motioned her inside. The hinges groaned. The place was simple but strong. A single table, 2 chairs, a shelf stacked with tools. The air smelled of wood ash and old leather. A fire glowed weakly in the hearth, throwing long shadows against the walls. He set a pot over the coals, ladled stew into a tin bowl, and slid it toward her. "Eat," she hesitated, glancing at the single bedroll by the wall. "Where will you?" He pointed to the floor. "You sleep." "I'll take there." It took her a moment to realize he meant it. She'd been prepared for cruelty, for some claim of debt or ownership. Instead, he turned his back, as if her safety was none of his business. Just duty done. The stew was thick and hot, filling her stomach for the first time in days. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the wind howled down the chimney like a trapped spirit. Eli sat by the table, repairing a torn strap with careful hands. In the flicker of light, his face looked carved from stone, angular, weathered, unreadable. He didn't ask her name, didn't tell his. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile, just worn, like an old coat that had seen too much weather. When the fire burned low, she lay down, staring at the ceiling beams. The rain eased to a whisper, then to nothing. Only the faint groan of timber and the heartbeat in her ears. She didn't mean to sleep, but exhaustion dragged her under. A crash of thunder woke her hours later. Lightning flashed through the single window, white and sudden. For an instant, she saw him by the fire, bare to the waist, a map of scars across his back, deep, brutal, old. Not whip marks, claw marks, as if the world itself had torn at him and he'd refused to fall. He turned slightly, eyes catching the light. She froze, pretending to sleep. He stood a long moment, then sat again, staring into the flames. When dawn crept pale and quiet through the fog, Clara opened her eyes to find him still awake. The fire had burned down to embers. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice barely a whisper. "Anna." The name hung in the stillness like a ghost. Clara's heart tightened. Whoever Anna was, she carried weight enough to keep a man like him awake through the night. Outside, a lone crow cried from the trees. The mist shifted, curling like smoke through the pines. Clara pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders. She'd escaped one kind of captivity, but she could feel it now, the pull of another mystery, deeper and colder than any chain, and she wasn't sure which would break her first. By the second morning, the storm had turned to snow. Thick flakes drifted through the trees, soft at first, then relentless, until the cabin vanished inside a white blur. The world shrank to the crackle of firewood, the whistle of wind through the shutters, and the sound of Eli's boots pacing the floor. They were trapped together, two strangers in a wilderness that had no mercy for the unprepared. Clara spent her first day curled in his coat, watching him move with the rhythm of a man long used to silence. He chopped wood outside until his beard was rimed with frost, then stacked the logs neatly beside the hearth. Every motion was deliberate, wordless, efficient. When he vanished at dawn the next day, she panicked, thinking he'd left her. But he returned with a snare full of rabbits and a branch heavy with pine cones. Without a word, he brushed the snow off his shoulders and began skinning the catch by the fire. His knife flashed quick and sure in the dim light. As hours stretched into days, Clara began to learn his quiet language, the way he nodded once before heading into the storm, the way he left an extra log near her chair before sleeping, the faint hum in his throat when the wind howled hardest. She started to move differently, too. The fear softened, replaced by a need to do something. She cleaned the soot-black kettle. She scrubbed the table with melted snow. She even tried her hand at stew, nearly ruining it until Eli reached over silent and added a pinch of salt from a hidden tin. The cabin slowly felt less like a cell and more like shelter carved from the mountain itself. That evening, while the fire glowed amber against the stone walls, Clara broke the silence. Her voice was small. "You didn't have to save me." Eli didn't look up from sharpening his knife. "Didn't sit right what they were doing," she hesitated. "You could have done worse." Most men would have. The knife stilled. He turned slightly, the light catching the scars across his cheek. "I ain't like them," he said. The words came rough, scraped from someplace deep. Something in his tone made her chest ache. She didn't know what to say, so she only nodded and went back to stirring the stew. Later, when he stepped outside to fetch more wood, Clara wandered to the mantel. A small shape rested there among the tools and tin cups, a carved wooden locket. She froze. It was hers. The hinge had been repaired, the splintered edges sanded smooth. Inside, the tiny photo of her parents gleamed clean again, framed by a thin ring of bark. He'd fixed it without a word. Her throat tightened. She traced the grain of the wood with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, though he wasn't there to hear it. Snow pressed against the windows, dulling the world to silence. For the first time since the auction, she felt something fragile stir inside. Safety. Maybe even belonging. But as dusk bled into night, the quiet shifted. The horses snorted outside. Eli came in fast, snow on his coat, eyes sharp. He moved to the window and peered into the white haze. "Someone's up on the ridge." Clara's pulse quickened. "A traveler?" He shook his head. "Rider. Alone." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled the rifle from above the door. His jaw clenched as he loaded a single round. "They'll come for you, Clara. Those debts don't die easy." The sound of the rifle bolt echoed like a warning through the cabin. For a long moment, there was nothing but the crackle of the fire and the low hiss of wind against the walls. Then, faintly, the sound of hooves, slow, deliberate, crunched through the snow outside. Eli stepped to the door and eased it open. The wind roared in, scattering ash across the floor. No rider waited there. Only a figure on horseback at the far tree line, still as stone, watching. He shut the door again, voice low. "Keep the fire low tonight," she nodded, heart pounding. The walls felt smaller, the air colder. Outside, the shape lingered until the dark swallowed it whole. But long after, when the storm calmed and the snow stopped falling, Clara swore she saw it again, just beyond the glass. A shadow moving where no man should be. The snow had melted into mud and dripping pine needles when Eli finally let Clara leave the cabin under his watchful eye. Her first steps into the forest were wobbly, her boots sucking at the wet earth. He handed her a small rifle, its wood polished and cold. "Keep it level. Don't flinch," he said. His voice was calm but firm, like the mountains themselves. Clara fumbled the rifle, muscles tense with fear. He guided her silently, adjusting her stance with rough, careful hands. She flinched when a branch snapped underfoot. He only murmured, "Steady. You move too fast." For hours they moved together through the trees. He showed her how to read the tracks of deer, how to place snares, how to fetch water from the stream without leaving a trace. In the evenings he demonstrated fire-making, rubbing sticks until sparks caught in dry moss. Their lessons were quiet, almost meditative. They spoke little, but the shared labor built a rhythm. Clara learned to anticipate his movements, to follow the sound of his boots, the shift of his weight. He hummed softly to himself while she cooked, the tune low, mournful, comforting. One morning she spilled boiling water on her hand. Pain shot through her fingers, white-hot and immediate. She yelped, stumbling back. Eli's hand was on hers before she could pull away, his fingers warm and steady. "You burn easy," he said, voice rough but soft. "You ain't made of glass." She laughed through tears of pain, the first sound of joy in weeks. The burn stung, but the gesture made her chest ache with a strange, fragile warmth. She realized she trusted him, more than she had anyone. Later, curiosity drew her to the cabin mantel. A leather-bound sketchbook lay half-hidden beneath a bundle of firewood. She opened it, careful not to tear the worn pages. Inside were drawings, rough at first, then more detailed. A woman with soft features bending over a small child, hair tangled in sunlight. Clara's fingers traced the lines. A single name appeared in the corner. Anna. She gasped softly. "Anna," she whispered, recalling the name she had overheard him mutter beside the dying fire. The drawings told a story she hadn't imagined. Anna had been his wife. The child their daughter. Fever had stolen them both. His grief had stayed, carved into the lines of his hands, the scar of his back, the silence that had guarded her in the cabin. Clara closed the book, pressing it to her chest. She felt a surge of compassion, something that went beyond gratitude. She knelt beside him as he patched a trap near the cabin, brushing pine needles from his shoulders. For the first time, she reached for his hand, hesitating, then holding it gently. "You saved me, Eli," she whispered. "Maybe I can save you too." He paused mid-motion, the muscles in his jaw taut. He didn't pull away. Instead, he exhaled slowly. And for a moment, his eyes softened in a way that made the mountains around them feel almost tender. The day waned, sunlight slipping between branches like spilled gold. The forest was still, except for the hum of the wind through the pines and the distant rush of a stream. Then it came. A single crack, sharp and piercing, echoing through the valley. They froze. Eli's hands tightened on the rifle, eyes narrowing at the slope beyond the cabin. "Someone's here," he muttered. Clara's stomach knotted. The sound was distant, but it carried the same threat they had fled. The men from town, the ranchers who did not forgive debts or disappearances. He scanned the tree line, muscles coiled and ready. "Stay low. Keep quiet." They crouched together behind a fallen log, hearts hammering in unison. The valley stretched wide, white and open beneath them, yet invisible threats lurked in every shadow. The forest no longer felt like a haven. It had become a battlefield. Clara's fingers brushed his arm, instinctive, seeking comfort. He didn't pull away. The crack of the rifle rang again, a warning through the air. Somewhere unseen, men were coming. The repaired locket hung heavy around Clara's neck, warm against her chest. Its smooth wood bore the marks of Eli's careful hands, a silent testament to her survival and his quiet protection. Each time she touched it, she remembered the auction block, the rain, the cold hands of men, and the one man who had spared her. One afternoon, the sun broke through lingering clouds. The snow had melted to reveal the first green shoots of spring. Eli led her to a sturdy pine near the cabin, its bark scarred by lightning long ago. He knelt, a small knife in hand. "Your initials first," he said, voice low. She pressed the blade into the bark, carving carefully, C.W. The wood gave way slowly, tender but firm. Eli followed with his own, E.C. They stepped back, surveying their work. The marks were small, crude, but they symbolized something greater. A claim not of ownership, but of belonging. Clara laughed, the sound spilling bright across the ridge, startling a pair of ravens from the trees. She had not laughed so freely since the auction. She ran her fingers along the carved initials, then along the locket, and felt a fleeting sense of peace. Eli watched her, his jaw tight. His eyes, gray and distant, traced the valley below, wary. "You deserve more than this, Mountain," he said softly. The words were heavy with unspoken truths. He had saved her, yes, but he could not protect her from the world forever. He would always be a mountain in her life, solid, immovable, dangerous. The evening came, dragging shadows across the cabin floor. Clara's laughter faded into the quiet hum of the hearth. She lay in her bedroll, locket against her heart, and eventually, exhaustion pulled her into dreams. In her sleep, she was back on the auction block. Hands reached for her, rough and demanding. Faces blurred into a single jeering mass. The sound of the gavel echoed in her ears, louder, crueler. Eli stirred beside the fire, alert. He had heard the soft cry she tried to smother, the tremor in her breathing. Without waking her, he sat at the edge of the bedroll, shoulders hunched, keeping guard until dawn. His presence was quiet, protective, a mountain itself, shielding her from nightmares. When morning light bled through the shutters, Clara awoke to an empty cabin. The fire had burned to embers, cold now. Her heart skipped, a pang of panic pressing her ribs. Outside the window, smoke rose in thin, curling streams from the valley below. The ridge glimmered under the first true sunlight of spring, but the smell of it, charred wood, faint hints of destruction, stung her nose and brought her fully awake. She clutched her locket, tracing its carved surface. Eli had left no note, no warning, only the faint echo of his presence. Like a shadow folded into the corners of the cabin. The mountains were peaceful now, green and silent. Yet the smoke told her something urgent. Something had come down from the heights. Something she could not see, but could feel. Clara's pulse quickened. Her hand slid to the hilt of the small knife she kept by her bedroll. She tried to listen, but the wind whispered only through the trees, carrying the faintest warning. The world outside the cabin had not forgotten her. Her eyes traveled again to the carved initials on the tree, CWEC, the locket pressed against her chest, a small solid anchor in the uncertain morning. She drew a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Somehow she knew the quiet peace of the mountain was over, and that what was coming would demand everything she had learned, and more. The morning mist lay thick across the ridge, curling around pines like ghostly fingers, when the sound of hooves shattered the fragile peace. Clara had risen before dawn, tending the small fire, when she spotted them, a line of riders cutting through the white haze. The lead horse ridden by the man who haunted her memories, Rourke, the rancher who had tried to buy her at the auction. Her stomach turned to ice. The men were armed, faces hard, eyes cold. Behind them, the sheriff's men rode with grim efficiency, rifles slung and hands twitching near triggers. They surrounded the cabin like predators circling prey. Eli stepped out first, rifle in hand, stance steady. His eyes met hers, shadowed with unease, but he didn't falter. Eli Creed. Rourke bellowed, voice carrying over the ridge. "You've stolen what belongs to me." "I ain't stolen nothing," Eli said quietly, voice like gravel sliding down the mountainside. "You're kidnapping, that's what," one of the sheriff's men called. "Step aside." Before Clara could intervene, the men surged forward. Eli raised his rifle, but the sheer number forced him back. A chain was produced from a wagon, its links cold and unforgiving. In moments, his hands were bound, wrists raw, and he was pushed into the center of the group. Clara ran to him, voice hoarse. "He saved me!" she screamed, but the wind swallowed her cries. The men laughed, shaking their heads, as if her words were the sound of children playing in a storm. Rourke stepped close, spitting into the mud. "We'll see how pure you stay now," he sneered, eyes glinting with cruel satisfaction. Eli's shoulders tensed under the chains, his jaw set against the humiliation. The sheriff gestured to mount the wagon, and with a shove, Eli was lifted and pushed into a crude cage, the iron bars biting into his arms. The wagon creaked as the wheels turned over frozen ruts, dragging him down the trail. Clara felt the urge to collapse. Her chest tightened. The wooden locket at her throat burned against her skin, a symbol of all she had survived and all she had yet to lose. Quick as thought, she unfastened it and slipped it into her pocket, pressing it close to her heart. She would not let him go. Her boots sank into the softening snow as she followed the wagon at a distance, keeping to the cover of trees. Every step was calculated, silent. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of her determination. Branches whipped her face, and the smell of pine mixed with the acrid tang of smoke from distant hearths. She swallowed her fear, reminding herself of every lesson Eli had taught her, the traps, the marks on the trails, the hidden paths. She knew these woods now, and they would protect her. The wagon rumbled down the valley, Eli seated inside, his head bowed. He didn't look at her, though she caught his eye once, a flicker of understanding, recognition of the bond they shared. His silence was a promise, survive and return. Clara crouched behind a tree, holding her breath as the wagon slowed near a bridge. The sheriff's men argued briefly, laughter cutting through the chill. Eli was shoved forward, his body pressed against the bars, as though every movement was a punishment. From her hiding spot, Clara's fingers grazed the locket in her pocket. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "I'll bring you back." "I swear it, Eli, or I die trying." The wagon moved again, disappearing down the slope. She watched the last glimpse of him, the stoic figure in the iron cage, vanish into the valley. A cold wind swept through the trees, rustling pine needles like the whisper of fate. Clara remained hidden, body tense, pulse pounding, eyes fixed on the trail. The forest offered safety, but it also held danger. Somewhere down there, Eli was bound, beaten, marching into a world of men who would not understand mercy. Her hands tightened around the locket, a symbol of trust, courage, and survival. She would follow. She would act. She would reclaim him. Above, a hawk screamed, cutting through the gray sky. It felt like a warning, a herald, and a challenge all at once. Somewhere below, the wagon creaked over rocks. Iron chains rattling, a sound that haunted Clara's every thought. She exhaled slowly, muscles coiled for the chase. The valley lay before her, open and treacherous. And in that moment she knew there was no turning back. The town hadn't changed. Same mud streets, same swinging saloon doors, same eyes that burned with gossip and hunger. But now Clara walked among them cloaked and silent, one of the faceless. Rain fell in steady lines, soaking through her hood, whispering against her cheeks like memory. The wagon rumbled into the square. Eli sat chained inside, shoulders hunched, soaked to the bone. His face was bruised and bloodied, his beard matted with rain. The sheriff's men dragged him down, boots slipping in the mud, jeers rising from the gathered crowd. "Bride thief," someone yelled. "Hang him high!" Another spat, Clara's breath caught. The same voices that had sold her were here again. Faces blurred by rain but sharp with cruelty. The wooden platform loomed above them, the noose already swaying in the wind like a snake waiting to strike. She pressed herself into the alley shadows, heart thudding like a drum. She had nothing left to give, except the one thing that mattered. At the blacksmith's forge, heat blazed despite the storm. She slipped inside, trembling. The man looked up, soot on his arms, suspicion in his eyes. "I need the chains loosened," she whispered, pulling the wooden locket from her pocket. It gleamed faintly in the firelight, warm, alive, full of memory. "This is all I have." He stared at her, then at the locket, and something softened behind the grime. "I ain't seen courage like that in years," he muttered. "You got one chance, girl." He nodded toward the gallows yard, where the guards would lead Eli at dawn. Outside, the sky cracked open with thunder. The town gathered tighter under umbrellas and hats, a sea of silhouettes. Clara crept through the rain-slick alleys, staying close to the walls, watching as the blacksmith moved among the guards, pretending to check the bolts on the chains. When the bell tolled, Eli was brought out. The rain fell harder, washing blood from his face. The sheriff read the charges: bride theft, unlawful concealment, obstruction of justice. Each word struck like a hammer. The crowd cheered. Eli's eyes found Clara in the shadows for just a heartbeat. He didn't flinch, didn't beg, but in that moment something passed between them. Trust, forgiveness, a promise forged in silence. The blacksmith worked fast. Clara saw his hand slip the bolt loose. A single link came undone beneath the cuffs. Not enough for freedom, but enough for a chance. The sheriff nodded to the hangman. The rope creaked, heavy and wet. Rain pooled on the platform as Eli was led up, steps slow, head high. The crowd jeered, hungry for a spectacle. Clara's body shook, not from fear, but fury. The same place where she had been sold was now where her savior would die. The hangman lowered the noose. Eli looked toward the sky, jaw tight, and then Clara moved. She stepped from the alley and into the open square, throwing back her hood. Her voice cut through the storm, fierce and breaking all at once. "If he dies, I die too." The words crashed through the air like thunder. The crowd gasped, whispers spreading like wildfire. "That's the girl." "She's alive? She's with him?" The sheriff froze, hand still raised. The hangman hesitated, rope trembling in his grip. For a heartbeat, the town was silent, but for the sound of rain and Eli's rough breath. Rourke pushed through the crowd, eyes blazing with rage. "You don't speak for him, girl," he snarled, drawing his pistol. "You belong to me." The sheriff turned, shocked. The blacksmith stiffened near the post. The townsfolk stumbled back, murmuring. Clara didn't move. She stood in the downpour, soaked and shivering, eyes locked on Eli. The gun's hammer clicked back. A shot cracked the air. The rain had turned the town square into a slick mire of mud. Thunder rattled across the rooftops as if the heavens themselves demanded vengeance. Eli's chains rattled against the wooden platform, eyes darting for any opening. The blacksmith moved suddenly, slipping a loose hammer from his belt and swinging it against one of the guards. The clanging echoed like a starting gun. Eli seized the moment. With a grunt, he wrenched the loosened chain free, snapping his hands from the iron cuffs. The hangman shouted, boots sliding on wet boards, but Eli was already moving, low and deliberate. Gunfire erupted. Rain hissed as bullets splashed into puddles, sending mud spraying across terrified onlookers. Clara ducked behind a splintered post, heart hammering. The rancher, Rourke, leveled his pistol toward Eli, eyes wild with fury. Eli fired first, ducking behind a crate as another shot zinged past his shoulder. Clara's fingers closed around a fallen rifle, its stock slick with rain. She swallowed hard, aiming, keeping her hands steady despite the tremor that ran from her shoulders to her fingertips. The world narrowed to one target. Rourke, a flash of movement. A muzzle flared. Clara pulled the trigger. The shot rang loud over the storm. Rourke jerked violently, a red bloom spreading across his chest. He fell into the mud, eyes wide, lips curled in disbelief. Eli's gaze met hers for a brief, intense moment. No words passed, but gratitude burned in their shared silence. Then he turned, moving toward her, sweeping her up as bullets spat past like angry hornets. Clara clung to him, soaked and shivering. Rain poured into her hair, plastering it to her face. Mud clung to her boots and skirts. Her hands were numb, but her pulse was fire. The last of the sheriff's men hesitated, seeing the chaos and the fallen rancher. Gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had started. Rain drowned the echoes. The sheriff lowered his weapon, mouth open, eyes wide with reluctant acknowledgement. "You got your justice, girl," he said finally, voice tight. "Now get out." Eli didn't wait for permission. He lifted Clara fully onto his horse, arms strong despite exhaustion, despite blood and mud. Her legs curled around him, heart still racing, body trembling but alive. The horse reared briefly, then thundered into the storm. Hooves slapping the soaked earth as lightning split the sky overhead. Behind them, the gallows sagged, its rope swinging limp. Witnesses drenched and silent. The town was a blur of mud, smoke, and shattered wood. Rain lashed at their faces as they climbed higher into the foothills. Clara pressed against Eli, her arms around his waist, breath ragged. Every muscle ached, every nerve alive with the terror and exhilaration of survival. She reached for the familiar weight at her throat, her locket, but found nothing. Panic stabbed her. Her fingers skimmed the damp fabric of her coat. The wooden charm, repaired and precious, was gone. A single tear mixed with the rain on her cheek. Eli glanced down at her, eyes meeting hers in the dim light of lightning flashes. His hands tightened around the reins, steady, protective. He didn't speak, but she understood. The locket was gone, but not the bond it symbolized, not the life they had survived together. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the jagged ridges of the mountains. Clara's chest tightened, half grief, half relief. The storm roared around them, wild and unyielding. But for the first time, she felt the wind against her face instead of fear. Somewhere behind them, the town slept in shock. Ahead, the wilderness waited. Muddy trails, pine forests, cliffs and valleys. But freedom too. Clara pressed closer, feeling Eli's heartbeat through his wet coat. Her hands curled into his shoulders, searching for the locket that wasn't there, yet finding the strength it had always promised. The storm carried them higher, into the raw, untamed heart of the mountains, galloping toward a future carved by courage, survival, and the quiet mercies of a man who had once saved her life and would do so again if need be. The mountains had softened under spring. Snowmelt ran in silver ribbons down the ridges, feeding wildflowers that colored the meadows with gold, violet, and white. The wind carried the scent of pine, damp earth, and the faint sweetness of blooming grasses. High above, a lone hawk circled, riding the currents as it had months before. When Clara first feared she would never be free, Clara knelt in the soil, hands darkened with dirt, planting a row of carrots and radishes beside the sturdy pine where their initials had been carved long ago. The bark had weathered, deepened by sun and rain, but it still bore the mark of their survival. A quiet testament to a bond forged in fire and fear. Eli stood nearby, watching her work with a careful eye, leaning on a shovel he had used to turn the stubborn mountain earth. His broad shoulders were relaxed. The tension of chains, men, and gallows finally melted into this shared peace. He hummed a low tune, a melody that had first threaded through the cabin during snowbound days, and Clara smiled at the familiarity. She held something new in her hands, a wooden locket, freshly carved from a piece of mountain pine. Its surface was smooth and warm, scented faintly of sap. She opened it and found 2 sketches inside. Her face, delicate and scarred by memory, and Eli's, rugged and marked by storms. "This one," she whispered, tracing the lines with a finger, "is ours." Eli approached, placing a hand gently over hers. He didn't need to speak. The gesture said everything. The old locket had been lost in chaos and rain, but its meaning had never vanished. This new locket was proof that life, even after the deepest injustice, could be reclaimed, remade, reborn. They worked in companionable silence, planting, weeding, and watering, the rhythm comforting as the world beyond the ridge remained distant and powerless. Clara's laughter echoed through the meadow when Eli dropped a carrot into her lap as a joke. It was light, unburdened, a sound that had once seemed impossible. Above them, the hawk circled again, catching a thermal and soaring higher. Clara watched, remembering the day of the auction, the fear, the rain, the cruel hands that had tried to claim her. She clenched the locket in her palm. "No one will ever own me again," she said softly, voice carried on the wind. Eli's eyes softened, a faint smile touching his lips. "Nor me," he said, low, sure. They sat together beneath the carved tree, watching the garden take shape, the mountains stretching endlessly around them. Each bloom, each furrow of earth, was a testament to endurance, trust, and quiet courage. Clara placed the locket around her neck, feeling its weight against her chest. It was more than wood and sketches. It was survival, memory, and love crystallized into something permanent. The past had lost its power over her. The auction block, the chains, the gallows. They existed only as shadows beneath the sun. Eli laid a hand on her shoulder, steady, grounding. She leaned into him, eyes closing briefly, inhaling the fresh, high-altitude air. Around them, the meadow shimmered with life. Shoots of green, the scent of damp earth, and the hum of bees already busy among the blossoms. The hawk wheeled overhead again, circling once, twice, then lifting higher into the sunlit sky. Clara followed its flight with her gaze, a symbol of freedom, of vigilance, of survival. Sunlight caught the edges of the locket, making it glint like a promise kept. Clara whispered again, this time to no one but herself and the mountains. "We're free." Finally, Eli's arm went around her waist, his fingers brushing the back of her hand. They sat beneath the carved tree side by side, watching the day stretch across the ridge. The past had been fierce, cruel, unyielding. But here, amid the garden, the mountains, the wind, and the hawk, they were home. The new locket gleamed in the sun, and for the first time, the world felt entirely theirs.